I graduated from Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. How many of you have heard of Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut? There's several Trinities. It's actually a Trinity University here in Texas. Not related at all to the Trinity College in Hartford. So I went to Trinity, and when I graduated from Trinity, I went to work for the one phone company. You're gonna figure out how old I am, okay? The one phone company that was in existence in the United States. How many of you remember the days when there was only one phone company? Come on, raise your hands. Okay, we're all dating ourselves right now, okay? What was that company? Okay, so a subsidiary of AT&T, Mapp. Okay, it was Southern Connecticut Telephone or Southern New England Telephone Company back in Connecticut where I grew up. So I went to work for the phone company. My parents worked there. I was following in their footsteps. And after about 9 years, I realized that that wasn't for me. I had started to do some volunteer work in the schools in New Haven, Connecticut, and I really felt a calling to work in the education system. So about 9 years after I started working at the Bell system, something happened called divestiture. I don't know how many of you remember that, but that was when the federal government said to AT&T, you're too big. You have to break up into smaller companies. And when they did that, they experimented with the first downsizing initiative. They made a critical error. They offered the packages to anybody of any age. Now you know how when you retire, you've got to have a combination of years plus age and all that stuff? They didn't do that. So a lot of their young people flew the coop, and I was one of them. So now I was like, great, I'm out, what am I gonna do? So I started thinking about becoming a guidance counselor. I got my master's degree in counselor education. And as I was looking for jobs in that area, I got a phone call from Trinity. And they said to me, you know, Karen, do you know anyone who might think about working in our admissions office? Our admissions office is looking for someone who will recruit students of color to Trinity and also students from different diverse economic backgrounds because Trinity was too homogeneous. And we could do a whole other workshop on that from my experience there as one of the few African American students. So I said, you know, I know somebody who might want that job. Me, right? So luckily I interviewed for that job and I got it. So now, as an assistant director of admissions at Trinity College, I had an opportunity to visit schools all around the country. So I had a chance to interview teenagers. Now for some reason, ladies and gentlemen, this may come as a shock to you, but teenagers love me for some reason. And they'll tell me anything. So if you have a son or daughter and you're trying to get some information out of them, call me. They're a teenager. Teenagers just, for some reason, they love me. So when I would go around the country, I started asking the teenagers, you know, I want to know why you think you've been so successful in school. Because if you know anything about Trinity College in Hartford, you will know that it's one of the top liberal arts colleges in the country, small liberal arts colleges. And so it was very tough to get into Trinity. So the students that I was talking to were in the top 10% of their class. So I wanted to know, you know, what do you think is the cause of your success? What are the factors that have led to you being such a good student? And these were students from all different walks of life. These were students from, you know, economically distressed communities. These were students, brown and black students, Asian students, poor white students, because again, these were the students that I was trying to attract to Trinity College. And I started to get an answer every single time I talked to these students that really surprised me. The students would talk about what you do. They would talk about their teachers and their principals, being people who would say what you could do, not what you couldn't do. Supporting them, saying, yes, you can, not no, you can't. But they also talked about their parents. Now, when I say parents in this presentation, and in my presentation this morning a little bit later on, I mean any adult caretaker. And you'll see that in a minute when we talk about the definition of family engagement. So those kids were talking about their grandparents, their aunts and uncles, not just their biological parents, foster parents, maybe sometimes even an older sibling. But they were saying to me, you know, Miss, because that's the kids call Miss, right? Miss, our parents are really important. Now, they also told me not to tell you. Don't tell them that they're important. But they said our parents really pushed us. They made us sit down and do that homework. They talked to us about the importance of education. They really pushed us hard to succeed. Every single student I talked to brought up their parents. So I started to say, you know, I don't hear much talk in the school narrative about families. Not as much as what these kids are telling me in terms of the importance of families. So I went back to the schools and I went back to the principals and I said, tell me about your relationship between your staff and families, because the kids are telling me that their families are really important. Now, don't forget, this was mostly high school principals I was talking to. Those principals said to me, you know, Miss Mapp, we don't know what you're talking about, because a lot of our families, especially of the kids that we serve at this school, poor families that don't speak English, we never see them. So we don't get this thing around family engagement. How could that be? They said their parents were really important. We don't understand that because we never see their families. So I said, you know what, there's a disconnect here. And I wanted to study what that disconnect was about and how maybe in a small way I could do something to change that. That's how I got started on this work 20 years ago. And I've been very passionate about it ever since. So I wanted to tell you that story so you would learn a little bit about me and why I do this work and why I'm so excited about this work. The fact that you all are having a day where you're talking about family and community engagement is fantastic. 20 years ago when I started this work, there were very few workshops. Maybe there would be an hour, a half hour, squeezed into a professional development session about family and community engagement. The fact that there's an infrastructure, that there are people here in your central office dedicated to family and community engagement is a big change that we're actually seeing. Aggie mentioned to you that I was Deputy Superintendent for Family and Community Engagement in Boston. That was back in 2003. And I was the only Deputy Superintendent, someone reporting directly to the Superintendent of Schools. I was the only one who had that position in the United States. There were no other people who had that position. Now there are over 200 around the country. We actually have a network now, a district leaders network, where people who work in this role in their various districts around the country get to come together and share best practice. So the field is really growing. So I'd like to switch to the PowerPoint now. And as I promised, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we now know from the research around family engagement. So one of the things we now know is that we have a definition that we're working with around family engagement that actually comes from the research. Now, some of you may remember the days when we were talking about parent involvement, and we've shifted to family engagement. How many of you have a cell phone? Raise your hand. Probably just about everyone in this room has a cell phone or a computer, an iPad, etc. Well, you know how every once in a while you'll get a little notification of an update, right? And it asks you, press this to update your computer or update your phone to get the new version. Well, that's what's happened to the definitions around families and being engaged in their children's education. So we started out with parent involvement, but people said, there's a problem with that term because, first of all, we want to have a term that's more inclusive, and as I said, Parent means any adult caretaker, so maybe a better term people felt would be to talk about family involvement. So for a while, we said family involvement. Then people said, that word involvement, it doesn't really connote what we're talking about. We really want to use a term that's more interactive, that really is talking about partnership. And so that's why engagement is now what we're using. So as I said, it's like the updates. We may change it again. Some people are talking about family empowerment, actually maybe being where we want to be and where we want to go, okay? But right now, family engagement is what we're using. You may see in a lot of the U.S. Department of Education publications, they're now talking about parent and family engagement. So we're starting to move the field to use the term family engagement. So what do we mean by family engagement? Well, family engagement, as I said to you, is really any way, an effective way that a child's adult caretaker, and as I explained, there's all different people who fit that definition, effectively supports learning and healthy development. Now, we say anyway because what's happened in many cases that actually restricts parents from being involved in their children's education is when our school systems narrowly define family engagement. So we're going to talk a little bit about the various roles that parents can play when they're involved in their children's education. So first, I want to tell you a little story or bring you up to speed with a lot of the stuff that's actually happening in the field of family engagement. So first of all, many of you know that there's a proposal in the works, if we can ever get the Elementary and Secondary Education Act passed, there's a proposal in the works that Secretary Duncan and President Obama have put in place where they're going to increase the money, the set aside in Title I for family engagement. Right now, it's set at a floor of 1%. You can spend more than that out of your Title I budget, but we want to increase it to 2%. So that's one thing that's in the works. Also, as I mentioned to you, a lot of senior level positions are being created around the country to offer support and guidance around family engagement. What else is happening? You're starting to see more family engagement language in a lot of the competitive programs that are coming out of the U.S. Department of Education. We were able to make family engagement a priority in the last two I3 competitions. So there's now an actual competition just for family engagement in the I3 language. Also, some of you may know that in the popular media, there's been a lot of talk about family engagement. So we had the Tiger Mom phenomenon. You had a movie that came out, very controversial, about the parent trigger laws around the country. And then finally, there's a lot happening around parent organizing around the country. We actually had a rally a few months ago at the U.S. Department of Education where parents from all over the country were coming to protest school closures. So you're getting a lot of action around family engagement. So let's talk a little about when families are effectively engaged in their children's education and in the improvement of schools. What are the various roles that they can play? Now, what I'd like you to do, even though this may seem like an impossibility, I want you to turn to a neighbor. Hopefully you're sitting close to someone. If you're not, you might want to scoot over. And I just want you to think about, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to think about what are the various roles. So if you're a parent, you can speak from your own personal experience. I want you to share with the person who's sitting next to you, what are some of the roles that you think that families can play in their children's education, especially when they're playing those roles effectively, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come out into the audience and walk around. You mic people, you can shut my mic off because I know we don't want to have any reverb. But I just want to hear some of the conversations and then I'm gonna come back up here and we're gonna talk about the roles, okay? Everybody got it? All right, so go to it. Okay. So I had a chance to walk around, and people came up with a lot of what I've actually got on the screen. So let's go over that now. So what are the different roles that parents can play? So you came up with these. So first of all, supporters of their children's learning. Okay, now we have the basics. Some people talked about, making sure your kids get to school and basic needs around, clothing and health and things like that, which, for a lot of our families, they struggle with that. And we'll talk about that in the workshop, about the kinds of supports that schools are now having to provide to families to make sure some of the basic needs are met. But in terms of sort of their more active roles around family engagement, supporters of their children's learning is very, very important. So again, maybe not, it doesn't require that families have to have, gone to school here in the US or speak English, but just supporting the whole concept of education is an important role. Another important role that goes with that is as an encourager. So some of the folks that I talked to down here mentioned, just encouraging that can-do spirit. So again, remember I said that students told me about you all making sure that you had a can-do spirit for their kids and saying, look, you can. The same for parents, because when families say to their kids, you can do it. I often talk to families about how you talk to your children about their successes and failures. If we use negative language, I know you've heard this, sometimes I hear this in the grocery store, well, you're never gonna amount to anything, or that's not the good language for kids. They need to hear, you can do it, you have to persevere. Teresa Perry has a fantastic book out called Young, Gifted, and Black. I use it in my classes a lot, not just to talk about achievement for Black students, but for all students, because she talks about something in there, it's a concept called counter-narrative. And she talks about how when we provide our students with a counter-narrative, in other words, letting them know that they can, that they are smart, then that sort of provides a buffer and a protection for them from all of the bad press we hear about teenagers, the bad press we hear about young people. I know for me, the counter-narrative that my family and my community provided me was very, very important when we moved to Branford, Connecticut. And that was where, I went from a neighborhood which was very diverse to a neighborhood where my brother and I were one of the few families of color, or kids of color in the school. So we didn't always hear good things about being a Black person. But I had a counter narrative that my community had built for me. So no matter what I heard from the outside, it didn't really matter, because my family and my community had built this can-do spirit in me. How many of you know what a pageant is? Have anybody heard that term, pageants for kids? We used to do pageants in my church. And I know my church still does pageants. And what that was that the kids were given the opportunity to do public speaking, and it was always, you can do it. So again, it's not just the families, but the communities that surround the kids provide that encouragement and support. So how else are families engaged? Monitors of their children's time and behavior. Can we have the slide back? Okay, thank you. Monitors of their children's time and behavior. So this is something that's very important to students. Remember I told you teenagers tell me things that they don't tell their families? I've done quite a few workshops with teenagers, and I ask them, is family engagement important? And they say, yes, it is. And one of the things they always talk about, and I've done workshops with teenagers all over the world. I actually did a workshop with 300 teenagers in Dubai last year. But the kids all say the same thing. They say to me, could you tell our parents we need parents and not friends? We don't want our parents as our friends. We want our parents to monitor our time, because the teenagers said to me, it's our job to drive our parents crazy. That's what teenagers are supposed to do. But we want them to persevere, because we need them to be there to set boundaries, to let us know what's appropriate. We don't always listen, we admit that, but we need our families to hang in there and to be monitors of what we do. So especially important for the teenagers. What else? Models of lifelong learning. Now we have a parent university program in Boston. Over 3,000 parents attend parent university regularly each year. And we have a graduation ceremony at the end of parent university where parents who have earned 8 PUPs, parent university points, they have to take 8 classes during the year to earn enough PUPs to graduate. That graduation ceremony is always a real tearjerker for me, but always so filled with excitement because all the kids come to see their parents graduate. Now, this is not, the certificate that they get doesn't, mean anything in terms of actual credits. But those kids come, and we've actually interviewed the kids about their parents attending parent university. And what the kids say is that it's so great to see my mom, my dad, my grandma back in school, and it's inspired me to do well in school. In our English language class for parents, we use the same books that the kids are using in school. So in many cases, parents are reading the same books that their students are reading, that their children are reading. So they're able to share information. In some cases, the kids are even coaching their families. So this is a real inspiration for the kids when they see that their parents are lifelong learners. What else? What other roles? Now this is the one that usually sends the shiver down the spine of many of my principals and superintendents, advocates and activists. How many of you, when you hear that word, you say, uh-oh, all right? Because for some people that means litigation, right? Lawyers, tense meetings with families. But it also means that when you need something at your school, when you have your parents at your back helping you, that's how many times you're able to get the resources that you need, that sometimes you're able to get other parents to work with parents around your community to get them to be more active. So I don't want you to be afraid of the term advocate, because I'm sure for all of you in this room that have kids, you know that advocacy is an important part of what you do to make sure that your children get that programming that they need or get access to those activities and supports. So advocacy is a good thing, and what we want to do is we want to cultivate advocacy in families. What else? What are some of the other roles? Decision makers and choosers. So in these roles, this is where parents can make choices for their kids and help their kids in terms of, again, the programming that's available to them, maybe helping them with college planning. If they're choosing schools, I know in many communities around the country, they may have a controlled choice plan, or they have different schools that are available for their children. So you want to make sure that your parents know how to make those decisions for their kids. And then finally, as collaborators, and this may be in the form of volunteering at school or collaborating with your staff in different ways. So you see, this might not even be all. I know one time I did a session with teachers and they came up with more ways of describing effective family engagement. But the reason why I think that this screen is important and the exercise I had you do is important is because a lot of times people only see families as volunteers, and that's it. So for your families who can't volunteer, who can't come to your school, you're Xing out their participation if you're narrowly defining their role. So what I really want you to think about, and what I'm going to have you do in the workshop, is to think about how can we actually cultivate these different roles? How can we let families know that they're not just relegated to being engaged in one way? A lot of times when I work with parents, this is what I find. Parents don't see their role as diverse as what we have up on this screen. Some parents think that their only role is to hand their children over to you. Rudy Crew calls those supply families. He says they supply us with their children. What he wants to do is cultivate what he calls more demand parents, parents who can really do all of these roles. So the question is, how do we build parents' capacity to get there? So we're going to talk about that more a little bit later. So let's talk about now the research on what we know about the importance of engaging your families. Why is family engagement so important? Now, I call this part of my presentation the where's the beef part of the presentation. How many of you remember the where's the beef lady? Right? Where's the beef? Right? She wanted to know if I'm going to spend my money on a hamburger, what was it, Wendy's? Right? I want to make sure that the money I spend is going to be worth it. I don't want to see a hamburger the size of a hockey puck. I expect something more substantive. Well, probably many of you in the audience are saying, you know, okay, fine, I see all those roles, but where's the beef? Why is this important? So these are some of the outcomes that we see when families are engaged in their children's education. So first of all, we see that children's reading and literacy acquisition skyrockets when their families are involved. We especially see this in the pre-K or the 0 to 5 years. Getting our families involved in reading activities, and you know, Joan, Kelly, I believe is Joan's last name, I don't know if she's here in the audience, one of my colleagues from Boston, she's going to be talking about literacy. You know, this is one of the things that we often overlook, is engaging our families in real, true literacy activities. Helping our families learn that just reading to your child is only half the battle. It's talking with your child about reading, okay? What else do we know? These are the kids who earn higher grades and test scores. So these are the students who do better in school. These were the kids I was talking to when I was at Trinity. What else happens? These are the kids who are enrolled in higher level programming. So these are the kids that are in your AP and honors classes. So I'm going to tell you a quick story about me and how my family intervened around this very issue. So when I was in high school, I was a very good student. And my junior year of high school, I decided that I was tired of taking really hard classes. Now, neither one of my parents at that time had graduated from college. They went on and got their degrees later on in life. Again, that lifelong learning. My brother and I seeing my parents wanting to continue with their learning, right? But when I was in high school, I decided I had had it. I was tired, the level of homework was driving me crazy, and I knew that if I took lower level courses, my parents wouldn't know because they had all these fancy schmancy names for the courses we were taking in high school. Not just Algebra 1, Algebra 2, but they had all these, you know, interesting names for the courses. So I convinced my girlfriend over the summer before we signed up for our courses that we were going to take a break. And we weren't going to enroll in the honors courses, as they called them back then. So luckily, my girlfriend's mom, who was a volunteer at the school, she was actually a lunch monitor, she went to school in August to say hello to the teachers because she was very gregarious and very social, and she was bringing probably some cookies or brownies to the teachers as they prepared to open up their classrooms. And she happened to stop by the guidance counselor's office, and the guidance counselor said to her, you know, your daughter changed her program, and she's not taking honors courses next year. And you know, colleges really look at that. They really look at, especially the junior and senior year, what kids are taking. She's going to end up not being able to apply to some really good schools. So my girlfriend's mom came home that night and she said to my friend, what the heck are you doing? Why did you make that change? What did my girlfriend tell her mother? What did she say? Karen, Matt told me to do this. Okay, gang, so what did my girlfriend's mother do next? Oh yeah, she called my mom up on the phone. She said, Lucille, the girls are trying to bamboozle us again. Right? Do I need to ask you what happened next? I was in trouble, okay? And from that day on, my parents wanted to see every quarter, because we were on the quarter system back then, what I was taking. And they would call my guidance counselor and say, what should she be taking, okay? Now, if my parents hadn't intervened, I might not be standing before you today, because they learned about what I should be taking. That's one of the things that we don't often share with our families. What kinds of courses should kids be taking? In fact, when I was doing my college planning at Trinity and I started working with parents, I started working with parents of 5th graders to start preparing them for the kinds of things they needed to know so that their kids would be able to get into 4-year colleges. 5th graders. Because as we all know, the kinds of courses that kids take, especially algebra and around the 7th grade, game changer for a lot of our kids, okay? What's next on the list? These are the kids who adapt better to school and attend more regularly. They're promoted on time and earn more credits. They have better social skills and behavior, and they graduate and go on to higher education, okay? So not only do we know that family engagement has an impact on our kids, we now know that it has an impact on your ability to turn around schools. This is a book by some colleagues of mine at the Chicago Consortium on School Research, Organizing Schools for Improvement, Lessons from Chicago. And this is a study that was done on elementary schools in Chicago. And they looked at the difference between a large group of elementary schools that were not doing well and a group of elementary schools that were doing quite well. And they were trying to figure out, well, what's the difference? Because a lot of the techniques and strategies that they were rolling out at that time in Chicago were the same. Why is it that some schools did much better and were able to improve student outcomes and others couldn't? Well, what they discovered, ladies and gentlemen, was that there are what they're calling 5 essential supports to school improvement. In other words, think of this as a cake recipe, and that there are 5 main ingredients to make sure that that cake is excellent. The first one, strong leadership. So that's what you see in the blue circle. The leadership drives everything that happens in that school building. Now, what they also learned is that it's a certain type of leadership, ladies and gentlemen, what we call distributive leadership. In other words, the school leader is not afraid to share power. That power is distributed about the building so that that person cultivates teacher leadership, other staff leadership, and even parent and student leadership. I can often tell the school leaders who have that kind of culture at their schools when I do small workshops, and these are the folks who, don't have to look at their PDA for hours. They don't have to look at their cell phone. They don't have to do any of that kind of under the table stuff, because there are people at the school building who have it under control. But if you're the type of school leader that everything, the buck stops here, well, it's very difficult for you to have this kind of distributive leadership, okay? So distributive leadership is really what we're teaching now in many of our school leadership programs, sharing power. What are some of the other ingredients? Number 2, professional capacity, meaning everybody in the building, from the custodians on up to the principal, are effective practitioners. Not that they know everything when they come to the building, but that they're willing to learn. But look at what we've got in number 3. Parent and community ties. What these researchers have found, ladies and gentlemen, is that having family and community engagement is a key ingredient to improving schools. When you take out the family and community engagement, the schools don't improve. Now, why is this important? It's really important to me, doing this research for 20 years, because for a long time, I had a hard time convincing school leaders and superintendents that they should see family engagement and community engagement as anything but an add-on. Something that you do when you get around to it. I have a lot of superintendents say to me, well, you know, Dr. Mapp, you know, we hear that family engagement is important, but we've got to concentrate on teaching and learning. Teaching and learning is what's most important. Well, guess what? Your family engagement, your community engagement affects what happens in the classroom. So if you don't see family engagement as a strategy for school improvement, it can actually hinder your efforts to improve teaching and learning. It's got to be a part of your whole school reform strategy. So what this research was telling us is that you no longer can see family engagement as an add-on. It's got to be a part of your whole school improvement plan. It's got to be a part of your district improvement plan. The other two things that are required in that diagram had to do with a student-centered learning climate, making sure you keep your students at the center of the enterprise. It's about what the students need, not about what the adults need. And then finally, instructional guidance, making sure that your teachers and your other staff have the support that they need. Now you'll see all those arrows point to that block. That's your instructional core. That's your teaching and learning. And so what they found was that all of these pieces combined affect what happens in your classroom. Very, very important. So let me just quickly, because I think I have about 10 more minutes, okay? What I want to do is I want to give you an idea of what partnership really looks like. Because we talk about family engagement and partnerships and things like that, but when I wrote the book Beyond the Bake Sale with my colleagues Ann Henderson and Don Davies and Vivian Johnson, we found out that a lot of people talked about partnerships with families, but they didn't really know what partnerships look like. So when we wrote Beyond the Bake Sale, in the first couple of chapters, we put together a rubric that really defines what partnership, when it's effective, what it looks like. So what I want to do is I want to go over that rubric with you quickly. And I want you to think about either the school that you're working with or the schools that you're working with. And I want you to ask yourself a question. Where are we along this continuum? So let's start with number 1. This scale goes from 1 to 4, with 1 being below basic and 4 being advanced. So let's start with the first description of a school. This was what we would call a fortress school. So this would get a 1 if we were using this rubric. These are real quotes, ladies and gentlemen, okay? I didn't make these up. These were taken from our research. Take a good look at that building. Hopefully you can see that there's some sharks in the water there. The building doesn't look too friendly. And when I went to these schools, I would hear things like, you know, Dr. Mapp, we've tried everything, but these parents just don't care about their kids' education. They're the reason our kids are failing. We have great teachers at the school, but our parents undermine everything that we do. We have conferences, we call them, we send taxis for them. They still don't come. They tell us they're coming, and they don't show up to anything that we have at the school. We've got a few cooperative parents. We like them. They don't give us any lip. They come in, they sign that Title I parent compact for us every year without even looking at it, no problem. Sometimes they don't even have kids at our school anymore. They've graduated, but we like these parents. They're cooperative. You know, our teachers say, we're not social workers. That parent engagement stuff, that's for social workers. And we hear you talking about explain the curriculum to our parents. Dr. Mapp, you don't know our parents. They don't speak English. Many of them just arrived in this country. They're not interested in any of this. This is what we call a fortress school. And like I said to you, these are real quotes. Another thing that can make your school a fortress school is if when I come to your school building, It's very difficult for me to find the front door. I've had this experience many, many times where I've gone to a school and I park in the lot, and sometimes the parking spaces for visitors are about a mile away. I get to the school and I can't find the front door. I pull on one, that doesn't open. I pull on another one, that doesn't open. The kids see me, they're like, look at that lady. I say, open the door. They say, go around, go around. So I finally find the front door. I walk into the building. There's no signage to tell me where the front office is. The school tells me, I learned from reading about the school that, there's about 12 different languages spoken at the school, but there's no signs in anything. If there is a sign, it's just in English. Then when I walk in and I go to the front office, I go to the desk, and there's the school secretary or another volunteer. One time I went to a school and the person looked up at me and he said, what do you want? Yes, true story. Okay? So your school can be a fortress school if when I walk in, I'm treated like an alien. Someone who doesn't belong. I don't get a smile. Welcome to our school. One of the things that one of the districts that I've worked with in Canada, what they've done is that the principals have teamed up and they're doing mystery shopping visits to each other's schools. So a principal from another school will dress in a pair of jeans and a t-shirt and maybe a baseball cap and go to one of his colleagues' schools and then report back on how they were treated when they came to the front office. Your front office staff can make or break your school and put you in that fortress category. I'm actually working with some schools now that have called Nordstrom's. Another school system has called Four Seasons and asked their people to come in and do a training for their front office staff on customer service. Okay? They're taking this very seriously. Your front office staff are sometimes the first people who your families meet. And that experience can either open up the doors for those families to be engaged or close them forever. All right? Let's go to number 2. A come if we call school. These are schools that operate under the mantra, and I'm going to say something and I want you to respond, okay? These schools operate under the mantra, don't call us, we'll call you. So yes, you can come to that parent-teacher conference or come to that open house. You can see in the picture the sharks are gone, but what, the door is closed, right? We get to say when it comes down and when it comes up. All of the workshops are planned by staff. We never ask what the parents like because we know best. We know what you need. You need those parenting workshops. Your kids are out of control. So that's what we're going to do. You can come by and visit on that report card day. We'll leave you some messages with the automated system. But don't show up here unannounced. Now, when I asked my principals in Boston, I had 145 schools, they admitted to me, after much real honest conversation, that they were come if we call schools. That they would smile at the open houses and they would smile at the parent-teacher conferences, but don't let parents show up without an appointment or unannounced. So come if we call schools. A little bit better, but really not all that welcoming to parents, at least not 24/7. Next one, an open door school. Now we're getting a little bit better. So these are schools, you can see the door is down. Maybe they've created some kind of protocol for family visits. So I don't want you to think that I'm talking about open door means just a free-for-all. These are schools that now have a protocol that they've worked on with parents about open door policy. They have their parent-teacher conferences regularly. They actually have an action team at their school for family engagement. Some of you may know of Joyce Epstein's work, and she talks about this as key. Even if you have a family coordinator or a parent liaison at your school, you still need a committee that's going to work on your family engagement activities for the year. And you'll see later why that's so important. If you don't have an infrastructure set up to handle your family engagement, even at the school level, it's very difficult for you to make progress. What else do they have? The school holds various parent events at least 3 or 4 times a year, if not more. Parents can now raise issues at their PTA or PTO or school site council, whatever school governance you may have. And the diversity of the families is now being recognized, hopefully in things more than what I call feasts and festivals. Hopefully they're being recognized in the classroom. Children are seeing themselves and their families in the classroom curriculum and discussions. So a little bit better. But what the problem is with this is that there's still really no two-way communication. There's no reciprocity here. Families are not being asked really about their opinions about what's happening with the school. So finally, here we go. Partnership. And this is what we really are striving for. This is where families are really seen as equal partners in the enterprise of student achievement and school improvement. That the staff feels very strongly that the school will never be a great school without their families. How many of you have driven a car without power steering? How many of you have had that experience? Again, I'm dating myself, okay? There still are some cars around there that don't have power steering. Now, you can drive it, you can do it, it works, but it's a lot more effort. Trying to parallel park with a car that doesn't have power steering is a true experience. I remember my brother and I used to pull the wheel together with my mother to try to help her. And I actually drove a car without power steering for a very long time. Like I said, you can do it, you can function, but it takes a lot more effort. It's the same thing around student achievement and school improvement. You can do it without family engagement, but it's a lot harder when your families aren't members of your team. A lot harder. One of the things that schools and school staff report to me around the country is that when they really have their family engagement efforts working well, their teachers can really feel it in terms of feeling that they don't have to do everything anymore. They have real team players at their school with their families. All family activities are linked to learning. Very important. What we do in this country many times around family engagement is what we call random acts of family engagement. Any and everything just to appease and keep our families quiet. No. What you want is for all your family engagement activities to be linked to the learning that's happening in your schools. Parents have been pleading with me. Miss, please tell the educators we want to learn how to support our students' achievement. In the workshop, we're going to talk about your open houses. Do your parents know what their children should know and be able to do when they walk out of your open houses every year? A test I do in districts is I walk up to parents and I say, can you tell me 1 or 2 things your child should know and be able to do at the end of the grade they are now in? Your parents should be able to answer that question. If you haven't shared that information with them and then also given them tips and tools for how to help their children get there, then you're not doing robust family engagement. All your family engagement should be linked to learning. Your school plays. Even some schools have done stuff at sporting events. They'll have trivia questions at sporting events where families get prizes. Guess what? Those trivia questions come from the state tests. You could figure out fun ways to make this happening, but your family should never leave an event at your school without a new tip or a tool for how to help their children's learning. There's a clear and open process at partnership schools for solving problems. Parent networks are cultivated. You don't just want to do individualized family engagement, where it's just the teacher and the parent, the teacher and the parent. You want it so that your parents get together and share information. Because guess what? For a lot of our families who are new to this country, they don't have networks. A lot of what we learn about how to support our children's learning comes from the networks that we have in our lives. It's called social capital. So a lot of these great family engagement initiatives around the country are making it so that parents are mentoring other parents, and they're facilitating that kind of conversation among parents. If you've just come to this country and you're working 2 or 3 jobs, your network is very limited. So what we do in terms of our partnership activities can really help our parents broaden their networks. And then finally, staff conduct relationship building initiatives with families. Some of you know that there's a mantra all around the world about if you're going to start a business or you're looking for a home, there's 3 things that you should always remember. What are those 3 things? Location, location, location. I'm here to tell you that your family engagement rests on 3 things in terms of whether or not it's going to work. Relationship, relationship, relationship. If you haven't built relationships with your families, ladies and gentlemen, your family engagement efforts will fail, full stop. Think about in your lives the people who you want to please and the people who you want to do things for. They're people who you have a relationship with, you trust them, you respect them. It's the same for family engagement. If you haven't spent time building relationships with your families, and guess what? That means usually that you have to go into your family's communities, into their homes, into their supermarkets, into their beauty parlors and nail shops, so they can meet and see you and know you're serious about engaging them. None of the program that you put in place is going to work. And I will be talking to you about how to do all this in my workshop. So finally, I talked to you about that cake, okay? About that recipe. I want to underscore for you here that your homeschool partnerships are an essential ingredient to your school improvement. I want you to think of family engagement like the baking powder in a cake. What happens if you don't put baking powder in a cake? It's flat, right? How much do you usually use? Teeny amount. Seems like it's insignificant. But that baking powder is an accelerant. It makes all the other ingredients work. That's what family engagement will do for you. Just like when you omit the baking powder, the cake never rises. In this case, your students will never rise to the levels that you want them to achieve. I want to thank you for listening to me. I look forward to those of you who are going to be in the workshop. When we do the workshop at 11:15, I would appreciate it if you tried to all sit here. I don't want anybody in the back, okay? Thank you very much.